It'll stay live right on Facebook.
Bye. And I believe we're live.
Welcome back, everyone, for the second part of our CelloChat series on the George Walker Cello Sonata. My name is Francesca McNeely, here again with this wonderful, wonderful panel of cellists. We have Astrid Schween of the Juilliard Quartet and the Juilliard School, Owen Young of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, Emmanuel Feldman, faculty at Tufts and New England Conservatory, as well as Seth Parker Woods of the University of Chicago and the Kaufman Music Center. And we have the added pleasure today of being joined by the incredible pianist, Joy Cline Phinney, faculty of the Sarasota and Easton music festivals. And as I mentioned last week, every cellist here on this panel is connected to Joy, whether personally or professionally. And she's actually worked on this particular sonata with 3 of the 4 cellists on our panel, and soon to be me. You've been warned, Joy. I'll got you next. So it's a really special treat to have her insight today. And of course, a huge thank you to Will Suh for your technical help, and a thank you to Delos for granting us permission to use these recording clips. So our discussion last week centered mostly around the first movement of the sonata. Today, we have our intention is to give overviews of the latter 2 movements, highlighting spots here and there. And we do have the full piano score today for everyone's reference. So without further ado, let's just dive right in. We'll save some time at the end for some broad strokes on the piece, but let's go into the second movement.
All right, hello everyone. So I think what would be really great is if we just start by having a little listen to the beginning of the second movement, just to kind of wrap our eyes and ears around this movement. Right, here we go. Okay, so maybe let's take it back to the beginning here again. Those who have thoughts, maybe let's hear. Actually, would be love to hear from Joy. I think, as the resident pianist, your experiences working through this sonata, but specifically starting with this movement specifically.
I had the pleasure of working a couple of times with Dr. Walker, and specifically in this movement, I asked him what his inspiration was. I wanted to get kind of a character that he was trying to go for, and he had first talked mainly about his compositional style and his love for using canons, which you can see in section B, where the piano starts this rising figure, and then the cello echoes it, and it keeps rising higher and higher. at some point we'll come back to it where the cello actually will start and the piano will have a canonic answer to that. He actually, I kept pressing him and I said, what kind of mood, are you trying to create? Can you give me 2 adjectives? And finally, I was able to get him to say that the rising figures, he wanted a sense of hope, but the hope was never realized, and that it was still within a dissonant context. So there's a sense of resignation, but still this striving for hope. And he finally said, hope someday in the future. And that was about all I could get from him. But I thought it was wonderful because I was able to get a characteristic, that he was maybe thinking about at the time. Sometimes I would get too expressive in the piano line, and he stressed how important it is to keep the rhythmic pulse without taking additional time, and said that the tension is really created by keeping that pulse, and that the slowing down is really written in at the end of the second movement.
Awesome. So what are you thinking of as far as the piano part? Because these opening chords for you, really, it really just starts the solo cello with the piano, just basically just with the F sharp. So what are you thinking with all of these tied, extenuated pitches or chords, and then eventually you start to have a little bit of movement with the half notes and then more tiedness? It almost for me seems like kind of bells tolling. And I kind of
I'm sorry, what?
like
It almost
it's
seems
like bells tolling, essentially ringing out, essentially in the far distance.
Mhm.
The sense of longing. Of course, that tension is already there, just simply because of what almost seems like a recitative, essentially, with just very very little like stasis movement that's actually happening there underneath the line.
I think of trying to set a mood and trying to set a character. Often I wait, but not too long between the first and second movement, but just sort of a very calming of everything because the first movement ends very dramatic. And then just kind of setting the tone for this vast landscape, which has very stark piano writing. I think it's just beautiful.
I know. Oh, sorry about that. No, I just wanted to jump in. I mean, something again, kind of reconciling sometimes what you see with what you hear. For anyone who, maybe a little less experience with music like this, you see these piano chords that look like they're sustaining, right? But of course, the piano is an instrument that decays, and so there's something to be said about even just the dissonance of seeing that, right? You see this melodic line in the cello continue, but the piano is trying to participate. But at the end of the day, these, like Seth mentions, this sort of bell-like, the sound decays and it drops and it evaporates, and I think there's something quite beautiful and painful about that.
I think you have to take in consideration careful thought about pedaling. And before you start, be sure that you have the sustaining pedal down. And there are other places where you don't want to blur the harmonies, where he has a half step, but you still want to have the sustained bass note. So that takes a lot of thought in terms of preparation before one performs it on the piano side.
And then even in contrast with that, or kind of in tandem with that, just sustaining and getting kind of out of the way of harmony, even in the cello line, especially. Milking it, but not milking it too much, I would say. Coloring, vibrato, timing, shifts, especially as it moves rather quickly up in the tessitura of the range for the cello. I would love for some of the cohort here to talk about even just the opening or just moving through harmonies, especially with the hairpins that happen here in the measure 7, I think it is.
Hi, can I jump in for a moment? This is Astrid. It's great to have you, Joy, and it's so beautiful to hear this lovely recording that you and Emmanuel made together. I have to say, it's really an inspiration. You guys play so beautifully. I was thinking about this opening and where did Dr. Walker get the theme? I don't really know, and I think I remember talking to him, and he said, well, everything in this piece is derived from something else. And if you think of the second theme from the first movement with those double stops, right, that plague all the cellists, there's a little something especially in the lower voice of that, I think, that's represented here in this opening theme. And then just this, as Joy described it, this kind of upward rising, and Seth, I think you said as well, the upward arc of this cello line going all the way to the fourth stanza down, finally with effort achieving the high F at the forte. There's something so solitary and lonely about that ascent, and the fact that the piano chords do disappear, like Francesca was saying, they're not really there. The cello's climbing out of its context, and there's something of I hear something like a spiritual voice in that, or perhaps even the feeling of a Kaddish. It's very dark, and you hear even the second theme where we stopped in the canon, how hauntingly beautiful that is. So he had some very deep things on his mind. Yeah, sorry.
It's still kind of rhapsodic, that sense of this kind of rhapsody-like writing, even in this much slower tempo than in the opening of the first. He still keeps with this, even though I think first glances, I think maybe at the score, like, oh, this is probably not too hard. And you start to get into, you're like, oh no.
Yeah, right. Well, even with the punctual sort of feeling of pulse, there's still great freedom in the solo line. It's really extraordinary.
I wanted to say something about the cello line, just the way it's built, the way everyone keeps talking about how it rises. What seems to be happening is he's taking a perfect fourth each time when he rises up, and then later the perfect fourth gives way to a minor third. And I was, talking with the panel before about this. There's some similarities in the soulfulness and the deep qualities of this movement with the Shostakovich Cello Sonata slow movement, where you've got lots of that rising and descending minor thirds. It's kind of a bluesy kind of gesture, but I think that's the way he's rising. And when I spoke with Dr. Walker, he always had an explanation for these things. I never really asked him how he constructed this particular line, but it seems that that's the way it works. And then he has, this wonderful use of the half steps. Each time he has a half step, adds just a little bit more tension to the rising line. And it seems that bluesy minor third is when you get later into the apex of the piece at 63, where you get up to a high F sharp. That's where that gets established and sort of culminated. Also, just one thing to mention, we've been talking about this, before, and now I wanted to say something about the origins of the piece that hasn't come up. I got to speak with Dr. Walker about, how this sonata come about, and evidently he was at the Easton School of Music, and there was a young woman, a cellist, who asked him to write this, and I'm hoping this is okay to say, but she said, I don't have a lot of money, but I can give you $20 to write the piece, and he did.
Wow.
So I think there was some admiration on his part for her. And so maybe this is some of, when you hear some of this writing, that it's some of that emotional aching. He was always reaching out to people. He always wanted to tell people about his music, and you can feel that very deep sense of communication in his writing. But it's a very interesting origins to the story of how it got started.
Sadly, just adding to what Emmanuel said, he said when he finished the sonata, he couldn't find her.
Yep.
So, but we are all blessed with his sonata.
I know.
It's forth.
I want to know who she is.
I'm so curious, and I couldn't get it out of him. I got the cello story about. He said she was a very beautiful cellist.
Yeah, he said the same.
And inspired him, and then he said it was published, I guess, a year or two later after Easton.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, let's hope that somebody in the Facebook hive mind can figure this out for us. But now I'm actually wondering, Joy, if this unrequited hope was not possibly just a story of unrequited love in that regard. Just to throw that out there to the world. Who knows?
I wanted to add one quick thing. In the section B, one of the things that he stressed, there's this hopeful rising canon between the right hand of the piano and then followed by the cello. But you notice there's the repeating bass note. And he said it's very important that that occurs rhythmically without taking time, because he said it's kind of like the knell of the inevitable. And so you have this juxtaposed sort of this knell going on
Yeah.
and this rising figure in both the piano right hand and the cello line. But I thought it's just really beautiful how it's, he has this continuously woven through that section. And
Yeah, it's like almost like time passing when you hear that.
Or like it kind of, for me, it's always felt like the time not necessarily stops, but there is this feeling of like everything is just like holding and going, but it's not necessarily, it's active but inactive at the same time, stasis and movement all at the same time.
Well,
It's
that
exactly
kind
that.
of brings up the Shostakovich reference again, doesn't it? That sense of rhythmic tolling and then such simple counterpoint, and yet this atmosphere couldn't be more specific. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, the holding back of the syncopes is what gives it that just a little bit tinge of anxiety, because time's moving forward, but it keeps holding back in some way. He's got that incredible balance between the two.
That 20th century angst lives
Yes.
on and propels us. What would we have done without that?
It's very, I'm just going to jump in. I agree with all this, that sort of sparsity and that rhythmic pulse. I agree. I just wanted to bring up one other point, that, the marking of the second movement of Sustanuto. And I'm looking at my part here and remembering, so last week we talked about the slurring lots of things and whether that was right or not. And I have in my part that I actually, to achieve that Sustanuto, there's a lot of, not a lot of separate notes and a lot of slurs there. And one other thing I wanted to bring up was how wonderfully he writes the dynamics, and it's a clear what he means by piano dolce or pianissimo, the little swells, the crescendos. It's all really there's no you don't have to guess too much about what he wants or where he's going. And I have a little note, and I'm in my part, and I don't know if it was from when Joy and I played for him or not. I think it might have, but there's two little notes. One is it says full, which I don't know if I was playing it to, I don't know, whatever, but he did definitely want that Sustanuto quality. And then the second one, more importantly, was attention to dynamics and eighth note rests. Actually, to stop so if you notice, there's not many rests when the cello's playing, but there are these little eighth note rests. I don't know, Joy, maybe, I don't remember if it was you or if it was him that it says literally don't blow over those eighth note rests in between things. And I think that also helps to give that sort of feeling of longing. And so if you look, the first one is oh geez, I don't know.
It's one of the 27.
Yeah. And all these little sort of breaths or little pauses between certain notes, I thought was kind of masterful. You didn't need to do that, really. But anyway, that's all I'm going to say about it.
Do you think we could hear this wonderful B section until those crazy A chords come in? So if we started at 22, Seth, would that be all right? And we can
Well-
go all the way to, I guess, bar 40, 41, something like that.
While Seth cues that up, I'll just say that, often with this is maybe more of a comment for younger cellists tackling a piece like this, but often we forget about the rest. Often the rest can say a lot. And I think in a piece where the description is sostenuto legato and there's all this thickness, yeah, the moments of silence can say a lot. So just to keep that in mind as people are, learning pieces like this.
Right. The silence is equally important. So to really pay attention to that as well as
I would suggest to cellists where those rests are to breathe there, because when it's when we sort of stop breathing during a long phrase like this and have any sort of anticipation or anxiety for the next note, just be in the moment and breathe those moments.
And he's intentional about actually adding in an eighth in these moments where the cello is not playing. The eighths are, it's almost still this reinstituting of this kind of bell strokes that are happening each time. So really holding that space, he's very intentional about that. So one allows you to draw you back to the piano, always going back. It really is the major undercurrent here that eventually does also take over the solo line, but also serves as a supporting character. Well, it is a supporting character, but truly out front. Yeah. Let's have a listen. Did you want to go further, Astrid? Was that good?
That's great. I just wanted to go there, and I was looking at this yesterday and just thinking, why does he stop that gorgeous progression with these kind of brittle, icy chords, right? And then I sort of started stacking them and looking, and I realized it's a stack of the canon theme without the E in it. Da 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 da. Right? They're like clunked on top of each other, and he's got a whole another layer, obviously, like most composers, right, of connection and harmonic relevance in this. But it's spun out so beautifully and so effortlessly. You don't notice the technique in that way.
Yeah.
Thanks for playing that.
Joy, what's your take? I mean, you're in many ways, you're really the soloist out front, and then the cello takes over. And you're always kind of giving one or two pitches in the piano part before the cellist eventually takes it. It's hidden really well, but not so well that you don't hear it. So it's quite nice. You're foreshadowing essentially, even if by a few seconds sometimes.
well, Walker talked a lot about the power of the interval and dissonance being expressive. And I love how he keeps changing the intervals slightly, as he goes up. And I think it's just very powerful how, the canon motivic writing is so intertwined. And then all of a sudden we land together in bar 41. And I guess even before that, bar 40. And then we have three statements where we're together, which is interesting, because we're sort of dovetailing each other. And then we're going to go back to the section A. And this time, Emmanuel will start, or whoever I'm playing it with, will take over the material.
That's so gorgeous. I hate to move things along, but I know that we wanted to get into the third movement. So if that's okay, I mean, I feel like I could listen to this for a long time. But maybe we should dive into the third movement a bit. I just want to give a. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just wondering if we could just see the very end of.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'll bring it to the very end of it, just the
Of the
last
second movement.
thing here. And then it's each time I play this, we kind of go right in. Just because it still feels like there is it really still feels as if there is a continuation. There's this whole that's happening so much within the second movement, all these suspensions, that it's quite exciting. It's almost humorous how it comes out right at the top of the third movement.
No.
I wanted to just point out how the motivic material slows down, where he goes, he's gone from the eighths to goes to quarters, to now half notes, now to tied full notes. And Dr. Walker said it's very important to keep the pulse and not to be too expressive and slow down, because he said it's very much written in. And wonderful performances when, the pulse is kept through the end of this, and it's the slowing down is written in. And I love it at the very end how you think it might resolve to something major, and it doesn't. So you're left with this just wondering, it ends on this beautiful dissonance, between the cello and the piano. And I think it's just beautiful writing.
Yeah, very organic. He's again using those same intervals in a linear way with the cello. You've got the measure 81. You've got the minor third going down, and then you've got you've got another fourth. I think that minor third again is that it can be used in so many ways. Composers have used it, like in Gershwin to sound bluesy, something like one of the Gershwin preludes, the second one's got something like that. It can sound bluesy, or it can sound like it sounds in Shostakovich. It can just sound like heart-wrenching. And I think he's playing with that. And then again, like we said in the first movement, he takes all those components, such pregnant ideas, that he then is able to use them again here backwards. He's going down a minor third and then down a perfect fourth. It's amazing. The structure is beautiful.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, Emmanuel, about the treatment of harmony in that way, because of course Shostakovich was no stranger to jazz either. I mean, he wrote quite a few jazz chamber pieces and chamber work. So it's just interesting to see those things come together. I know we want to get into the third movement. I want to give a really quick shout out though. I just see that Ashley Gordon and Ismar Gomez are with us again. Ashley, co-founder of Castle of Our Skins, I think a friend to pretty much everybody here as well. Fantastic violist who actually played this piece with Joy as a viola sonata, even though apparently there was also a George Walker viola sonata. So, but she loved doing this arrangement. So I just wanted to give a shout out to her, and a thank you also to Ismar for joining us again from last week.
Wow. Ashley, watch out. We're going to come after the viola sonata soon.
Ah.
one of the scariest and most beautiful moments. Just with the suspension there, that C sharp, hold.
And for pianists out there, it's very important to half pedal to be sure that you get that G sharp and sustain that F sharp octave. Because it's very important that it's very easy to lose the F sharp octave. So just a heads up.
Okay, let's jump right into to 3.
Great.
A little listen here. All right, here we go. We changed characters there, so let's go back a little bit. So there's a lot going on there, even just metric design, and I would be very interested to hear how you all pair your groupings, and then just to see a little bit later, there's some beautiful kind of interchange that comes around, like measure 78, where it gets even fiery or more fiery. Yeah.
It's fun to listen to these different interpretations of this, because I think we all played this for Dr. Walker, and we all played this with Joy. And it's this, even amongst us, the small group of people, there's a lot of variety, which is fantastic. You know, I was listening to the Italo Babini recording with George Walker, and Babini slurs the 16th notes, those transitional figures. That's all slurred. I did them separately, but then I did the main theme with lots of slurs, and Emmanuel's doing them with a lot of separates. So it's kind of interesting what the different takeaways and the different elements and the different ways of representing these facets. One thing that I think we can all agree upon is that doing the pizzicato at tempo is a really difficult ask. And I think it's part of the expression that George Walker wanted when he gets to that boogie woogie bass, which is basically like having the Passacaglia ground to this whole thing. Anyway, I just wanted to share the observations.
Can I ask a question, just as an observer who has not played this piece? This is mostly for the cellist, but what do you make of? So obviously the piece is in a compound meter. We have 6/8, but eventually that 6/8 immediately looks like a 3/4, but within the second line of the score, right? Measure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I wonder is the intention to really show those sorts of differences, to play out the hemiola, or is it just to keep it swinging in spite of what it looks like?
It's a great question. You might get a lot of different answers from us.
Yeah.
What do you think, Seth?
I mean, in my opinion, I really feel it as a big 2, especially when we go into those 6/8s coming out of the 3/8, because there's a groove. There's always a groove, and it never should really feel straight, even in the 9/8.
Yeah.
So I'm always think of it as a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, but the last two twos, the 8, 9, I always feel as if that's directly connected back as far as we propel through it. But in this 6/8 here, measure 8. So he's obscuring it in a very interesting way, especially in contrast with the actual piano part, where he chooses to actually have the entrances for it. But
Right. So your interpretation is just that the beaming isn't necessarily to be taken too dogmatically. It's sort of what you're
yeah, I think you have to kind of divorce, in my opinion, definitely divorcing sometimes what you're seeing alongside what he's trying to reference directly. So essentially it is a notation, but he's also pulling culturally and trying to infuse that definitely into the work. So trying to keep that same type of character and ethos still going through and still, in time.
I think Seth is giving great advice about this right now. If you're first learning the piece, definitely think of the big units. Dr. Walker always said this should be tossed off. It should be light. Shouldn't feel like you're a counting machine. Definitely, work those out. And I would agree with him. Go with what you hear, not with what you see on the page. Try to get those big units. I'm sometimes, when I'm looking at this now, and thinking of the way that I remember performing it, there are times where I'm thinking just whole bars and not even the subdivision of 2. It just depends. And, I'm looking in my part, I see a triangle here or there to keep me straight about what's happening and not fall in the hole, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that the hemiola idea in the beginning is helpful to ride that wave as much as you can and not be too seduced by the different metric markings. But this is the A section of the rondo, right? And we're going to hear this again and again throughout this movement in various permutations. So just surviving this first version takes quite a bit of rehearsal.
Does anybody want to talk about those pizzicatos at 36? Or are we gonna just kind of say,
Well,
I mean, it's yeah. Owen, tell us something.
well, okay. I'm gonna full disclosure. This is when the 16 note pizzicatos there that are almost impossible to do, but you did them. That one, you mean 36? Where 36? Yeah.
Yes.
You know what, Joy? I may have cheated. I may have played those arco. Oh my goodness. Well,
Just getting out there, it's fiendishly difficult.
it's really hard. I don't remember. Anyway.
Oh,
I
Do
think
you
Walker,
do you do 2 fingers? Daga, 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 daga. Maybe I did do pizzicato, but I would definitely use 2 fingers, right?
Okay, so that's where I wanted to get into this deeper with all these cellists here and cellists out there watching, saying, okay, I'm going to play this piece. I did work out doing 2 fingers, but in the end, I just want to tell everybody what I came up with was holding my bow. There's no time to get your bow out of there. You can put your first finger like this, and you can take your string and you can go like that. And I believe that is the only way to nail that.
that's like the string on the barrel technique, Emmanuel. That's like the big standing.
That's right. Like a steel cello or one of those basses. I think it's that kind of technique. I mean, there might be a way to do this. I found it didn't have enough sound, no matter how much I tried. And I'd look at videos of people that I knew, like, look at somebody like John Clayton doing that on the bass, how to do that and then practice it. It just never was loud enough with the piano. So I think if you work on it slowly and you just go daka, 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 like this, and don't keep your finger too rigid, let it sort of be like a pick. You get the right feeling. It'll happen eventually, is what I found.
Here's something in working. This is years ago, but working with Dr. Walker, I mean, it's extremely difficult, but also doing this, the back and forth, almost like a slap bass, essentially. It works only to a certain extent. And so what we devised, just talking with him on this, is part of this measure is slightly out of time. So there's almost an cello rondo midway through this, and then it gets right back into tempo for the second measure. So it's so it gives you time to actually kind of set up, because you're kind of coming right out of this arco. And so that worked, and he liked it. So I think you have to find something character-wise that's still going to work really well. But that was a great device that I worked up with him on it. And I suggested to others so that way you really do get the accents. You still get the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So you still want that to still very much so be in there, not get so bogged down by all of the 16s that are in there with all the doubles. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Seth. It's good to know what your solution was. I actually did, I think, what Owen did in the end. I would pitch where I could, but mostly I felt like the ground was disappearing too much for the piano, which is quite active. Pianist is playing forte with all those offbeat, jagged rhythms. And then if you have like the struggling cello bottom, it just didn't seem fit. So in the end, I tried to find something like almost like a ponticello, very punchy, percussive bow stroke, and he seemed to accept it. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember now that, again, like Emmanuel was saying, it was never loud enough. And I did the same thing. I didn't play arco in the sense of, I try to make the arco sound like it's like pizzicato or something. I kind of cheat, but I'm encouraged that there may be a way to actually do it pizzicato and make it work. One other thing I wanted to say about this is, and I wonder what everybody else thinks. When I hear this, it's definitely Dr. Walker wrote this incredibly specifically rondo form, very rigid, clear in his ideas and the meters. But I wonder if he was also striving for a certain improvisatory quality to it, like that's written in,
like
that you don't know what it's going to do. That's sort of the bebop kind of, which I think he's very successful in doing. So it doesn't sound always that it is actually written down specifically, but there's this sort of play, this freedom of improvisation written into that. Anybody have any comments on that?
It's like riffs, right?
Yeah.
Like solo riffs on top
Like
of
Yeah. Just like even in the Coleridge, Taylor Perkinson's Lamentations, there's a lot of this writing that's like that, where it really, really, truly is just not idiomatic or idiomatic riffs that are just notated out. So again, kind of going beyond what you're seeing necessarily on the page and trying to figure out exactly what type of groove he's after, what type of phrase structure he's after. And I think that'll help guide you. Of course, we have to do the heavy lifting of shedding all of this and making sure it's still there. But making sure that you still have that ethos that's very much so in it.
He mentions being fascinated by bebop when he was writing this, and just said that he was listening to it and what was going on at the time, even though it's not specifically bebop. But you notice the tempo marking is 84 for the dotted quarter. And when I first started this, I thought, wow, that's fast. And so then I kind of slowed it down, seeing what's coming later. The piano part's very difficult, and the cello part is very difficult. And I think the first time I played it for him, I slowed the tempo down, and he just said, it's too slow, And he said it's really important to have that sort of tossed off character, improvisatory, if you will, character throughout this movement. And if it's played too slowly, it sounds too academic and the character's not right. But as these rondo statements keep coming back, they keep getting more complex, rhythmically complex, and technically complex. And but if you really keep the tempo marking, it has this breathless lightness to it that's just wonderful.
May I add that, Joy, I agree that 84 is a perfect tempo. He's like great composers. He really means it, and it really.
But it's fast.
It's fast.
It's
hard. And yeah, we spent lots of time together, two of us, going through the piece very slowly. I remember that. We put on a metronome. We went through the ending. We went through everything. It's just part of the work. I wanted to say though that when you get to measure 47. Where it goes into this new section, that's an opportunity to slow it down. And I think we did. And so academically, yes, the tempo should be pretty strict up to that point, but then there it can relax for sure.
That's the return of the A music, right? The rondo theme is in the piano now. So yeah, it kind of reverts a little bit. I wanted to just add one slightly geeky comment about the music at 39. Thanks, Seth, for scrolling back. If you see where the piano, unfortunately, I've had a little throat surgery here and I can't really sing, but we're da dum ba dum ba da da dum ba da. That music, I think that's a little bit of the slow movement theme on steroids. There's that rising fourth that Emmanuel was talking about in the half step action. And so he's sort of crafting similar figures and shapes
Brilliant.
and boogie woogieing it into a whole new kind of energy. It's fantastic. I don't know if you agree, but I thought that was kind of cool.
I agree. Wonderful. Wow.
Wonderful. Yeah.
I think speaking of the complexities, I would love to jump to this kind of after this beat section where essentially comes back, but going into like 78, 8-ish, somewhere in there. This is an area where you really see kind of compound versions of this hemiola that's actually happening, but between the two, between the right hand, well, left and right in the piano, but also in conjunction with the cello. And just so we're now in a 9/8, I believe, right? I think so. Yeah, is that right?
Since we're talking about this section over here, Seth, let me just interject. At 77, I have never ever played that last pizzicato in the measure. I always did just the first two. I don't know if it's possible, but I never did. And when we made the recording, I wasn't gonna, like cut it in like non-reality. So it's not there. I don't think it's possible. Maybe you guys.
I took it out as well, just because you really need that strong downbeat for that F sharp.
I played it all arco.
Oh,
I was shameless. I was like, you know what?
So
Here we
difficult.
go.
Difficult.
Okay, so pro tips for anybody tackling this piece.
You got options. You have options.
yeah, definitely.
Let's have a look at this. I mean, I'm interested to hear how you guys, everyone went through all of this section, especially like not necessarily 77 because that's tied to the material slightly before. We're really getting into 78 onwards. We really start to see everything. Kind of it's a breakdown essentially, but still extremely virtuosic. But looking at just the metricity of all of this between the piano part and the cello part, like how are you thinking just about as far as like metric phrase structure within the 9/8? Are you really thinking 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 or 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2? Like what's your pulsing? Because I think it can go either way, but I think still having that sense of that, like the bass essentially that's there, that's laying down the bass line. I think that some way needs to necessarily still be there, especially in 79. That part's actually quite, like for me, it's always been really exciting, and it's always been like a little bit of an exciting fight between the cello and the piano. Because then from there, those last two eighths, essentially from 79, 80, you really start to get the punctuations in the last last 4/16 of the. So it's really exciting how he starts to really build this out.
Yeah, he gets more demanding there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
With all these accents, and definitely making sure those things come out, and then especially in conjunction with the piano. So, what was this like for any of you, especially Joy? Definitely, because you got a lot going on here.
I'm so curious.
Go ahead.
I'm curious for cellists, like how he has these off accents, and how you all are able to do that without slowing down, like keeping the time, and because it's so fast. And when I first looked at it, I thought, is it really possible to bring those out? So I'm curious what you all do.
It's the ground, right? I mean, that hasn't changed. 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 5 6. So, and the accents are on strong beats of that.
Yeah.
So it kind of has a natural feel. Maybe it's more natural feeling than it looks, I think, for the cello player at that point. And I think just staying firm so that you, the pianist, can have your riff and be sure that the ground is there for you. I think that was sort of my approach to it. I don't know. What did you think about Emmanuel?
I think, Astrid, you're right on target with this thing. You just have to be completely independent of the piano. The piano is doing its own thing. You don't want to get in the way. It should be totally rhythmically tight. And when I'm, like if you look at measure 79, and you look at the accentuation that George has got in the part there, that's all you need to hold on to. The notes in between don't matter as much. It's like when you're playing fast passages, like scalar passages. This is just jumping around. As cellists, we can just jump across strings for the octaves. It's not really that hard. I just went with the accentuation there, just like that. And you stick with what he wrote in terms of accentuation, and there's no problem. He made our lives easy there. So I think that's what you have to do. Stick with the accentuation. That is the rhythmic grouping.
Yeah, I mean, but I think alongside that, I mean, it's, yes, sticking with the rhythm, sticking with the accents, but I think there's a major interaction that's happening metrically, but with the piano here. She has the and really the way the pitch classes are working against the rhythm within the 16th is so that's essentially what's happening within 9/8. So I think still having those groupings, and when you put that together, it's absolutely amazing. So with my duo partner, we spent a lot of time just singing this to really hear exactly what's going on before putting it together. So I think having those groupings of 3 within just the first essentially the first 3 eighth notes, but now in 16ths, having that come out and bringing out those harmonies. I don't think just keeping it straight ahead. You still need to have that groove. I don't think it becomes very academic and square. None of it really is. There's always there's so much character, and I think bringing out all that, especially when the accents really come in, it makes it even more exciting. But definitely doing the woodshedding in there, it has to happen. But that's in my conversations and working with him, this is something that we definitely work to bring out, and I still push this even with my duo partner. So it's one of the scariest parts, especially what comes up right after all of this.
You know what it makes me think of, Seth, is I think of like Billie Holiday or some great scat singer coming in and doing those accents and just kind of playing off the boom, 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 right? The drums and the bass are going. And yes, you're right. It's like all that stuff you just said is happening, but to be a little bit aloof and have a little virtuoso perspective so that the rhythm, it jibes, but it doesn't preoccupy in the spirit of that lightness that Joy and Emmanuel were talking about. I mean, yeah, that's the art of it, right? Is to figure it out and then back away and let it stand.
Also, keep in mind that the commonality in all those measures, 79, 80, 81, is the last, you always have all the 16ths together for the most part. That's the place to lock in with your partner at the end of those measures and then establish the beginning. I wasn't trying to say that when you play the cello part and you're trying to keep it academically correct, you're listening. And I think it's important the articulation should be really dry so the piano part comes out here, but it should be somewhat, in my opinion, just mechanical. All the 16th notes are filled in on 79, and later you're going out in and out, so to speak. You just can't disturb the texture. The pianist rules here, and I feel that's my role as a cellist, to not get in the way. But not also, don't diminish your own role. You still have to be fortissimo when he says, and clear. So super dry and really, really hammered.
I just want to note right quick too, adding to Emmanuel's comment, just how hard the piano part is here. And George Walker was a phenomenal pianist. And the first time I asked him about this, I said, this is so hard. And there were a couple of places where I couldn't quite grab the lower octave. And he said, it's so crucial that keep the lower octave there, but it's very difficult to hit that in time. And then also all of what's going on above. And he kind of sat down the first time and just said like this, and I thought, oh,
yes, like that.
I'm humbled.
Oh, sorry. Are
Oh,
you
go
talking?
ahead.
Oh no, I didn't want to interrupt you. I was just going to say, in this section, I often imagine sometimes what would it sound like without the accents? Why are those accents there? And the obvious answer, I think, would be the whole context, the whole feeling, the whole character of it would change quite a bit. I think we would all agree. And so, like what Astrid was saying, the accents sort of are so important, and give it the necessary punctuation, the character that drives this whole movement. As if both instruments are trying to get a point across, like that, and the accents really are explosive in their emotionality, like the emotional content. Like, so you have something you're trying to articulate, and I think it's part of this character of this whole movement.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and adding to your point, Owen, I think a really wonderful exercise just in general is always to ask, well, to take away something that you're not sure why the composer had it in there. So take away the accents. I mean, I had a really wonderful chamber coach make us do this exercise for, it was Beethoven's Sarasota string quartet, where after that first phrase, it jumps into A5 major or something. And she basically had us do an exercise where we jumped to any key. It was just anything except for the one written down. And it's a fascinating, just exercise to do, just to make yourself then ask, okay, then why did the composer put it this way? I think this could totally apply here beautifully if you just take out all the accents, see what that tells you, and then add them back in, and that'll answer any kind of mysteries I think anybody could have about a passage like that. I'd actually love to hear this section. You guys have really talked it up for a minute.
Can I just say one thing before we hear it?
Yeah.
I noticed, like, going into 81, Owen was talking about what are these accents doing. You've got the last little bit of that pizzicato riff right there on the last 16th. You got C, G, F sharp. He jumps down, but it's dum bum 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 bum. It's that same stuff, and he's bringing it out right there. Again, compositionally, he's a genius. He just finds ways to bring it back in.
And and actually, Emmanuel, that sort of adds to a comment that Ismar just threw in on Facebook. I'm just saying that the accents also help to lengthen the line sometimes, adding a spiky emphasis. But to your point about it pulls out certain parts of the phrase, I guess, or the melody in some cases embedded. And
Yeah.
so again.
Okay, let's have a listen.
Woohoo!
Wow.
There are
But-
those big A chords again, stopping all the fun, right?
Yeah.
I was really into that. That was
Yeah.
fantastic. Great.
Well, I know we're hitting just about 1 o'clock, and I know that Seth at least is gonna have to get out of where he is right now. But maybe if it's okay with everybody, I'd love to maybe do a wrap up of this piece, if that's all right. I mean, and maybe could I actually start? I mean, if anybody wants to jump in with points, feel free. Any sort of big takeaways. But I did have one question for Joy in particular, since actually, do you mind unscreen sharing, Seth, if that's okay? So, Joy, you're the one person who's had this opportunity to play this piece. I mean, really for generations of your own life, right? Like just different phases as a student, as a different times as a professional with different cellists, but all with the composer. And I would just love to hear if you had any big takeaways from. I mean, I don't know if he if you felt like he changed over time or whether his approach was pretty similar. I don't know. You have a unique voice in this. I'd love to hear more.
I just want to say it's been a pleasure with all of you. It's been so much fun. I met George Walker, actually, Dr. George Walker, when I was a child. And he and his wife accepted a position at the University of Colorado. And I was trying to think, I was maybe around 6, but his family and my family became very good friends. Primarily his then wife, Helen Walker Hill, and 2 sons, Gregory and Ian. And my first impression of him was extremely disciplined and very, he was always wearing a suit and a tie, which was a little unusual in Boulder, Colorado. This was very much sort of the hippies time. And I think I was maybe about 6 when I heard him play a recital, and I was just blown away. I mean, it was phenomenal. I think it was like Schumann Kreisleriana. It was one of these big Schumann pieces. And I just remember being struck by what a phenomenal pianist. And he just was very, I think, precise and disciplined about everything. I think that's one of my first impressions about him. He scared me a little bit because he was so, he had, this commanding presence, but he was always just impeccable. So the first time I worked with him, he was very, 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 very strict about, this is what I want. This is, do it this way. And after the performance, I kind of asked him, what did you think? And he kind of went, well. And he's very, he's very disciplined, and he's very specific about what he wants in terms of, interpreting his pieces. And I think as each time I worked with him, I think maybe he mellowed a little bit, and certainly not in terms of what he expected artistically, but I think he mellowed in terms of being open to ideas. For instance, like the last person I worked with was Emmanuel. And Emmanuel had a lot of great ideas about, well, maybe you could play it this way, or maybe, and I kind of expected him to say, no, do it this way. And he went, oh, that sounds good. Yeah. So I think it was exciting to kind of witness from when I was a child, which, I just kind of have impressions that I remember. I do remember asking my mother, I said something to the effect of, why is Mr. Walker dressed up all the time? And at that moment, my mom told me what a genius he was, and how he had played in concert halls around the world and had played with the Philadelphia Orchestra. And, he had this very illustrious background. And I had never been out of Boulder, Colorado at that point. And I remember just thinking, wow. And so it just was a pleasure to be able to work with him a couple of times, sort of generationally. And
No, it's wonderful. I mean, really unique experience that you had. I don't know if anybody has other, I know I have a couple other points I could bring up, but I know, Seth, you probably have to go soon, and feel free to just take it away.
I was going to also mention something I was speaking to the group about before, which ties into what I'm about to say now. There are probably cellists out there looking and saying, hey, look at the ending. Wow, that wasn't in that octave. That was in a different octave. There's some things that all of us know as players that Dr. Walker told us. He said, last 4 bars, put that up an octave. And then there are questions about notes and things. A really cool thing happened. I approached the publisher of the sonata and proposed making a new performance edition with them. And happily, they've accepted, and I'll be working with them and with Greg Walker. He's the violinist, George's son. Yep, George's son. And we're going to get a performance edition out there with corrections, notes from Dr. Walker that I've got, and we'll be looking at hopefully a manuscript version of the piece, and so to make it into something that's going to be useful for people to be able to play the piece more easily, and so that it's more readily available and that people know about it. We'll try to do some good PR and let people know, because everybody with cello aspirations to play great music should be out there checking out this piece. So just wanted to mention that. And anyone can get in touch with me if they need more information. I hope it'll happen quick. I just started, so
Yeah.
it'll take a little while.
No, thank you for sharing that news. It's fantastic. And of course, I mean, Cello Bello will gladly help promote when the information comes out. So please let us know.
Great.
I don't know if this is a good moment to just jump in and say, fantastic, Emmanuel. I'm so glad you're taking that on. And I know all of us would love to just feed you the notes that we have to kind of, nurture that full reservoir of information.
Please.
Yes. I didn't know Walker as long as Joy did, but I met him when I was 18, and I last played his piece for him just a couple years ago. And I have to say, he was just as meticulous at the end as he was when I was younger. And he was like, if you're going to record this piece, we're going to talk about the different things, because he was really very exacting and so very much alive in the sense of his compositional work. And we talked last week about what a great pianist he was. He was extraordinary,
Phenomenal.
highly decorated as both composer and soloist. So it's really a privilege to be able to celebrate this particular piece of his. It's been great.
And to see it become more of the standard cello repertoire, which it absolutely should be. And
Yeah. I think also, just speaking to the level of cello playing that's rising, I want to give a big shout out to Cello Bello for sponsoring this, because as cellists we can all go up and go higher. I'm as a teacher, I'm just watching the younger players are have so much more technique and so much more ability. They have also access, luckily, to YouTube and recordings and podcasts and forums like this. I think the new generation is totally up to this piece. It's going to be great as people come and discover it. So thanks to Cello Bello, and thanks to everybody here. It's been wonderful getting to know some colleagues here even more, sharing ideas. So thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here. I guess if we don't have any other points, I mean, that might be a.
Are there any questions in the feed, Francesca?
There aren't any questions right now, but a lot of adoration and a lot of love and support. And thank you for to everyone who's watching and who's. I mean, we have some added comments from some people who played the piece, obviously. But this will be eventually archived on the website, so anyone can find this later. It'll be on our YouTube channel for in perpetuity, as well as our Facebook link. So with that, thank you, everybody. Hope you've enjoyed this exploration of this piece, and everybody go learn it now.
Thank you, Francesca. And thank you.
And look at his other music as well. Don't forget that. There's a slew of music from him, especially all of his chamber music. It's absolutely amazing. Beyond the quartet. There's so much. There's
cello
so
concerto
much.
and
Cello concerto, so cello concerto, then a
dialogues.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Also, just as hard.
I would suggest, Diallo,
So hard.
the concerto will keep you working from now until a very long time from now.
Good for you.
Keep you busy.
Francesca, thanks so much. And
Thank
you, guys.
to Paul Katz.
Bravo.
Great to see you all. Such a pleasure.
Bye.
Great to see you. Cheers.
Cheers.